3,
Faraz, are you
2,
ready?
1,
Let's go, bro. Oh, are you chugging it again or you're not chugging it anymore?
Let me do that. This is not safe, and we do not recommend anybody do this. Do not chug an entire cup of coffee right before you do a podcast or any sort of activity. This is not good. We talked about this with Farhad. We're always spending our time in the visual world, right? Everything we talk about on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok is
about creating words, creating visuals, AR, XR, Unreal Engine. It's all about visuals.
That's right. But we sometimes underappreciate the importance of sound. But as people who create content, as people who play games, The Last of Us 2, Dead Space, Alien Isolation, we watch films, we know the importance of sound. It's there subconsciously and it's enhancing that experience. And you know it when you play a good game. You know it when you watch a good movie with the rattling of the cage. You hear the rat in the corner. You hear the zombies growling at the back. All these things that add to the immersive experience. But when it's missing, it just destroys the whole experience, right? And the importance of sound is so high that we have to have that conversation here. Because up until now, every guest that we brought on was more so related to the visual world.
100%. And I think what was actually missing in all those conversations to take your experience to the next level is the sound design. But Faraz, why don't you tell us who's our guest today?
Okay, I'm super excited about this one. Our guest today is the virtuoso of immersive sound. He's the man who's going to make you thank yourself and your ears for existing. Now, he's not just a sound designer or a composer and a sound engineer. He's a sonic wizard whose projects have taken him to more countries than most people can locate on the map. From indie rock bands to Grammy-winning artists, from Netflix to Nintendo, he's left his melodic mark across multiple collaborations. With our guest today, we're going to be discussing the power of immersive sound, the technology behind it, and how he uses it to transport us into other dimensions. Our guest today is a very special one, everybody. We've got Mirko Vogel. What's up, Mirko?
Mirko, how's it going?
Hey guys, great to see you. Wow, that was a great bio. I think I'm going to steal that for myself.
For the LinkedIn, you can change your LinkedIn bio to this one. I think it sounds much better now.
Yeah, thanks. Awesome.
No worries at all. First of all, it's an honor to have you on the podcast. We are so delighted to speak with you. But before we even get into anything else, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you're the first guest that is actually here with us in Vancouver.
Yes,
right? Is that
exactly.
Right?
Like we are in the same city, of course, in the same physical place. I think we can wave through the window.
Hey, what's up, Mirko?
Hey, guys.
But a little backstory of actually how we met. Me and Faraz went to an event. It was AWE Night in Vancouver, which we always talk about XR and emerging tech. And there were 3 presentations on that day. And usually the presentations are about AR, XR, again, mostly visual. And then one of the presentations on that day that I think blew everybody's mind in the audience was Mirko's presentation. When he talked about immersive sound, those topics that he covered were the topics that people should have known. And honestly, we talked to someone after the conference and they were like, oh my God, what was your favorite speech? It was like, definitely the sound design and the immersive sound.
And it's the one we didn't expect. Honestly, it was the one because, there's different presentations when you go to different sort of events. And there's ones where you expect a lot from. And we come from the visual realm. We are spending most of our time there. I am interested in audio, but I didn't know I'm going to be fascinated for the next 20 minutes just hearing this guy talk. So Mirko is that person, and we had to have a conversation with him. So right after the presentation, we managed to have a chat with him and asked him to come on the podcast. So first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you enjoyed it. I was a bit. My slide presentation definitely had some envy of the other speakers that were speaking that night, but I'm glad that you found it useful, and I'm glad that it sparked some imagination and conversation for you guys.
100%. You started your presentation by telling everybody what do we mean by immersive sound and what does immersive sound means. Can we start our conversation with that here as well? Because I think sound and audio and how we talk about immersive sound is super important.
Absolutely. Well, I think the best way that we started, and I think we might have spoken about it after that presentation at the AWE night, is that there's sort of there's two for us as a company and for me as a designer. I think there's sort of two distinct approaches to it. I think it depends on where your content or your audience is going to be. And I think our approach to immersive sound for 2D displays is sort of one approach. And we as a company, we do a lot of work in film and TV, and especially here in Vancouver, a lot of animation work in our normal sort of linear storytelling work. And then we work in these immersive formats when you're immersed in a screen. And I think the approach to immersive sound, or to rather immersive sound, to immerse someone in a story, it has these two distinct approaches. And with a 2D display, you're really trying to keep somebody's attention at the right place, sometimes subconsciously and sometimes very consciously. Whereas in sort of more immersive displays, like a VR display or XR or AR displays, you're really trying to craft a more human experience. And these two things are I think there's two very different approaches to that. So for film and TV, you're often sort of you're creating an imagined sort of space for characters to live in, and you're trying to create these sort of imagined narratives. And in 3D displays, while that a lot of those factors still hold true, you're really trying to create a more human-centric experience where having something that's whizzing, zooming around you the whole time actually becomes really distracting, because that's not how real life is. And so that's where we as a company, we're really pushing a lot of our efforts into building these sort of more subjective sound experiences and the creative approach to that, versus in 2D displays where you have a much more objective approach to how you work. And so, yeah, when we talk about immersive sound or immersive storytelling or immersing somebody in a story, we're really talking about these two very different approaches. And I think up until now, we've got, 2D displays has got a long and super rich creative history in storytelling, all the way from when cinema first started having sound in with the picture, all the way to stereo sound, to quadraphonic sound, to 5.1 sound, and then to huge theatrical sound systems, to Dolby Atmos. And so from a technology perspective, we've had this really long kind of rich history, and we've seen a lot of sound artists and filmmakers and storytellers really lean into these new technologies and these new systems really effectively. And we're really just at the starting point with VR and how we treat sound in these sort of more immersive technologies. And I think it's a new experience as a creative community. How do we build nice places for people to spend time that feel creatively interesting, but that also feel a little bit more subconscious and a little bit more human, so that, like, because when we right now, right, we're looking at each other through a screen, and what is most important,
it's not so immersive.
Well, but it kind of is, right? Pardon me. So right now we're looking at each other through the screen, and what's really important is that we hear each other in this conversation. What I'm hearing from you is slightly different to what you're hearing from me. We're in different spaces, but it's the conversation that's important. What's not important right now is the background noise. So for instance, in this room, we have a little bit of air conditioning hum, and, we have like, maybe there's some cars idling outside. You guys probably can hear a little bit of traffic, and, every now and then, or like a police siren or something like that. So what we try to do when we're building these immersive stories in VR or XR or AR spaces is that we're trying to build this experience. We're trying to figure out what is important to that person at that very specific moment, and we're trying to not just emulate reality, but to sort of build like a hyper realistic version of that reality. But most importantly, focusing in on what is important to the person experiencing this thing that's happening. And that's going to be different for different content, different for different stories. But it's an important thing to think about in terms of like the focal points of what you're really building these worlds from. And what's interesting about these worlds, like even in this experience, which, you know, if you look at it at face value, it's a fairly two-dimensional kind of communication experience, right? Like we're on a screen, we're talking to each other, we're sort of looking at each other in the screen. You know, there's like it's quite a sort of, it's a little bit disconnected because we're not here in real life. But what's important to kind of think about is that we're bringing the right sounds into the experience at the right point, and we're not bringing them in as a mono sound source. We're bringing them in, like, even though our experience is at this point stereo, I think through this, you know, communication medium, my experience is actually very three-dimensional, as is yours. Like, you're probably hearing me through your headphones or through speakers, and you're hearing the reverberation in the room. You hear, like, your experience is different to mine, and it's different to the people that are going to be watching this at home or in their offices. So what we try and do is, like, we try and look at that point of view perspective of that experience. And we try and make that as lifelike and three-dimensional as possible. So if I'm trying, like, if we were to transplant this, like, my experience into a game or into a, you know, some sort of experience in VR or in sort of, you know, a head-mounted display system, if I was to try and emulate my own experience in this, I would have to think about the air conditioning hum, the reverberation of the room, the sound of the headphones, the sound of my own voice in this space, and also what I'm hearing back through the microphone. So there's sort of, you know, every sound that we have, there's these three-dimensional layers to the sound. And our job
How
as
do you
sound
guys
designers
plan for this? How do you guys plan for this? Like, is it someone like storyboarding visually that they will say that, oh, I need to walk to this room, open the door? Do you guys also put that when you're walking is the footstep, then doorknob, then aircon in the new room? Is it some kind of storyboarding for the sound design as well?
Kind of. So we sort of approach it in four categories. So if we're approaching a new, you know, a new thing that we're working on with a new client, we look at, we first look at the scenery. And if I was to take this room, for instance, I would take, okay, what's the size of the room? What's in the room? What's making sound? What, you know, what's important to the room? So, you know, if I have to build the personality of this space, I go like, well, yeah, there's a pipe that kind of runs along here that has like a little bit of a rattle when the air conditioning's like kicking in. We have a little bit of maybe office noise outside. We have maybe a little bit of traffic. But all very sub-perceptual. It's very, very low perception. So, but those are all the characteristics of the room. And then we have the reverberation, the sort of sound signature of the room. So that's the first thing. We have the space that something is happening in. Then we have static objects within that space. So like I just mentioned, like the little rattle of the air conditioning, you know, that kind of stuff. That would be a static object, but it's making noise and it's always in the same sort of spot. But it affects like the sound of the room, and it affects actually the kind of concentration that you have in this room. Again, like very sub-perceptual, but important. You know, it's not a silent space. Then, so we have the space, then we have static objects, then we have moving objects. Now, right now, there's not a lot of moving objects other than the chair that I'm sitting in, which has a little bit of a creak to it when I lean to the side. But that is a moving object, right? Like if I'm to emulate myself in this experience, we have to think about things that are moving. And I can't just have a static creak of a chair. The creak changes depending on where I'm leaning. And so that movable part is part of what lends the personality to the space. And that goes for in-game experience where we might have like something flying through the air, or we might have grass that's moving, you know, or like fauna or like things that are part of the environment that we're trying to capture, trees moving, you know, so anything like that. And then again, like a hyper-realistic versions of that, because we want to, if we're trying to draw someone's attention to feel cold, you know, we're trying to build this wind that's moving through the space, and that is part of that sort of, you know, movable object design experience. And then we have this sort of point of view experience that we're trying to model. And that is, for instance, this is sort of me talking to you guys through this microphone that's up here, and the the sound of my headphones and the sound of my voice in the room, like something that's very personal to the person viewing that. And so when we look in VR, especially, where we're sort of completely encapsulated in an environment and in a story, we have to take into account all of those layers and how they affect one another and how we sort of spec them out. So so in answer to your question, basically we look at what the requirements are for each scene, each object, and we analyze it in those sort of four sort of character traits. And then we look at the types of technologies that we apply to each of those scenes. So rather than going like, oh, we'll build everything in ambisonic, or we'll only use Dolby Atmos, or you have to take, like, each technology layer has its benefits and its negatives in this sort of sonic storytelling. And if I look at, what I've just sort of described, we might look at like an ambisonic sphere for the static room sound. Then we might look at a mono object for the air conditioning hum, but we might add a little bit of like a impulse response reverb, like a 3D reverb that is like very, very slight. But if I turn my head here, the air conditioning crackle, whatever is happening over here, but I'm still kind of getting the experience of like it's actually physically in the room, and then for movable objects, we might go like, well, actually we might use, for the whole project, we might use ambisonics as a way to represent three-dimensional sound. What technology layer do we need to put in place to build effective movable objects, and are they predetermined paths, or are they are they procedural in nature? And so again, like every object, every layer to this story might have a very different approach to how we create those assets, and then how they're implemented within, a platform, a story, a system, a game, that kind of thing.
That is
super
fascinating. I'm just listening to all this and the amount of work that goes behind the scenes. Because when you see, for example, a movie or a game, again, the only concern that people might have is the visuals. They're looking at it like, oh my god, that was really hard to animate. But no one, well, I would say seldom people think about how much work goes behind the scenes in the audio work to make something great. And the fact that as someone who's editing, we do try to add in the ambient sounds, right? We have access to like epidemic sounds and, artless IO. I guess a lot of editors would relate. And there's all these sounds that we can go and add to, increase the realism in what we create. But you're talking about static objects, or objects that I never even thought of adding into the videos that we put out. How important is it to add all these little detail, considering that the technologies available for consumers is not up to standard to what you guys are creating with? Because I feel like that's a conversation you had in the presentation, whereas, for example, you guys spend a ungodly amount of money on devices, in the studio that can create all these amazing audios and sounds and effects, whereas most people will be listening to them on their iPhones or Android devices, maybe not even with headphones. They're looking at this content through the speakers of their phone. How much of these sounds are actually later on propagated into these speakers and actually listened to? How much of that is lost through this transition from your studio to people's, devices?
Well, I think so. There's sort of two parts to this question for me. I think in terms of our approach and the work that we do, like our job as sound designers is to create, especially in immersive environments, is to model nature. And that's not to like emulate nature, but it's to model how we interact with the natural world. And the reason why we do these many steps is because nature is complicated and infinite in in our relationship as humans to the world around us being part of that natural ecosystem of the world. It's a complex relationship, and there's a lot of ego in our, like, not ego in a negative sense, but there's ego as in like we're egocentric beings, and so we expect things to be modeled after our own personal preference when we talk about technology and content. So our job as designers is to please the ego of the person and to do the best job possible to sort of encapsulate what makes nature and the world around us interesting to be in, and to sort of distill that down into something that's palatable for a specific experience. The way that we sort of look at consumer technology and the sound reproduction is we look at modeling the highest possible standard of creative of work, not just creative work, but in terms of sound. How people listen to these things will continue to change over the next, it'll continue to change forever. It'll go. I mean, if I have to make some predictions in terms of AR and how these technologies might improve over time, yeah, right now we've got a lot of mono speakers on the bottom of our telephones, where we listen to stuff. But we always have to cater to the lowest common denominator to make sure that our work functions properly on these devices. Now, technology companies do actually a pretty good job of just doing some of that distilling for us, so that we can deliver a really high, rich kind of experience, high quality and rich experience, and it will translate as best as it can through these through the little speakers at the bottom of a telephone. Now, is wearing, a better pair of headphones a better experience? Like, yes, of course. Is it playing through, a $500,000 speaker system going to be a better experience? Like, yeah, absolutely. But the good thing is that a lot of these technology companies that, are also fighting for a better user experience, if we give them more to work with, the end result will be better, regardless of the platform or the system that you're listening to it on. But we want our work to translate as best as it can in all formats. And so we could generally concentrate not on the lowest common denominator. We always check our work there, but we concentrate on what is the most high-end rich experience, and then we let the technology layer, the technology companies, do the distilling for us, and to represent the best possible quality for that device, for that user.
Are they... Sorry.
No, I just wanted to ask, who do you think is doing the best work in terms of doing that? Like, I'm not talking about like the most expensive. I don't know if the most expensive is the best in this category, but we have Apple AirPods, we have Sony, we have Bose. Like, which one do you think is doing the best job in translating all this audio work?
Well, I think there's a couple of companies doing really great work. I mean, if I have to sort of look at headphone companies, Apple being one of them, I think Apple are probably a few steps ahead in terms of having a robust ecosystem for the spatialization of sound. And they're one of the few companies that sort of do everything. Like they build the phone, they build the headphones, they build the editing platforms, they build the content creation systems, they have the content streaming systems. So they're sort of one of the only end-to-end systems of all the way from creating content to listening and experiencing it. So they can control the production pipeline and they can sort of set some standards of how things work. So Apple do a great job of that. What they don't do a great job of is making it cost effective. So really to experience, like whatever, they're like a huge company and they do amazing work, and there's a lot of really smart people that work there. And there's a reason why they make those decisions. I completely understand why they make those decisions. I think the only negative is like, yeah, it doesn't, like an $800 pair of headphones is not accessible to most people. Like there's a few people that will be willing to spend that kind of money on that system. But ultimately what we need is an accessible standard for all companies that they can work to. And so, yeah, so back to your question, if we look at like, okay, Apple, great system. I mean, we use it here. We have a bunch of those AirPod Max headphones. They sound phenomenal. this isn't a sales pitch for those headphones. There's definitely things I would change about them, but they're, it's a fantastic product. The AirPod Maxes, yeah, like, they sound okay. I think they're not the best sounding earbud, like the buds things, but but they're pretty good. I think Sony is doing a fantastic job with their, headphones. Their noise canceling stuff is amazing. The user experience is great. It's a better kind of price point. Bose obviously do an amazing job, and have pushed the envelope, like have really pushed how people consume audio, especially when traveling. And I mean, there's countless others. Like if we're talking about the headphone realm, there's lots of great sound reproduction technology companies as well. I mean, Mark One Spatial is an amazing system that really does a lot for creators and encapsulates a lot of robust technologies, including ambisonics and Dolby Atmos streams and stereo and 5.1. Obviously, Dolby are doing a great job. All these companies, they're all genuinely trying to have a better user experience. The only really critical point that I think we have, and I think we're sort of at this junction point of consumer tech, creative content like creatives and content makers. We're at this nexus point where we have companies that are essentially trying to silo people into a specific workflow and into a specific type of technology. And Dolby with Atmos is doing a great job of convincing people that that's what they should be doing. And it's a great system and definitely has a huge role to play in how immersive audio works. The one thing that we don't have, and I hope that this, might spark some conversation with your viewers and maybe amongst yourselves too, that what we don't have is we don't have a good open standard for the translation of gyroscopic data from headphones. So if I look at like Apple's system, and we talked a little bit about this at that AWE night, Apple has, because of its closed ecosystem, it can go like, okay, we interpret the gyroscopic data from the headphones like this, and our DSP on the computer reads it in this certain way. So, but there's really only 3 streams that come from the headphones, which is pitch, yaw, and roll. And so there's really only 3 things that the computer needs to read from the headphones, or the device needs to read from the headphones in order to interpret the spatialization of a specific data stream that's coming in. But because it's Apple, it's closed, and it's closed to only their products, which means you can't plug in a set of Bose headphones that might be more in your price point or more to your preference as a creator and take advantage of spatialization within those systems with head tracking. You can get binaural spatialization on every device, but with head tracking, so you can really, as a creator, hear how your work sounds. There is nothing like that. And so my hope is through these, conversations that we're having and for us, the meetings that we have with a lot of these companies, is that we can start to build a bit of momentum behind this idea that we need an open standard for headphone tracking. And if you can do that, then all of a sudden, I think we'll see that world of immersive audio open up, not only in terms of what creators can do, but in terms of the consumer experience that people might have. So that if you have an Android phone and you choose to buy some Sony headphones, you'll get full 360-degree spatialization on those headphones. You don't have to buy the Google headphones or the Apple things, or like whatever it is. Like currently we're very, like, all these companies are very protective, I guess rightly so. There's a lot of R&D, a lot of money that goes into building these things. But I think it's now time to start talking about having some sort of open standard for being able to read headphone tracking data, so that creators can start to experiment with this more, can start educating themselves more on how important this work might be in terms of their own work and their own output. and to give consumers a greater degree of choice and freedom in how they're experiencing that work. And I think if we really want to build an immersive future for ourselves in terms of like whether that's augmented reality or mixed reality or virtual reality or 2D displays, more objective ways of consuming and interacting with the world, we have to have these. We have to have that conversation, and we have to build a system that is open to all and open to all device manufacturers, so that whether you have an Apple VR display or a HTC display or a whatever Magic Leap display, whatever display you're using, and whatever that's going to look like in the future, there's a democratization to the process of accessing this immersive content. And I think that's sort of the biggest, I think the biggest hurdle that you were sort of talking like what's the jumping point into the from a consumer's perspective, like how do you work with that? That's the biggest hurdle. The device isn't the problem. There's amazing devices that have more than enough DSP power to do this. There's the stuff is already built in to the system, and I think that that is the biggest. That's the biggest hurdle. The biggest hurdle isn't the device. Right? It's how we as a community of creators can maybe rally to build some of these open standards so that the interpretation layer for that work is more robust.
I have a question in regard. We talked about device, so headphone and an iPhone, assuming, or a phone. Does the platform also matters? So if I listen to music on Spotify or Apple Music, is there any differences where they control the way that the sound is translated, or no, it's solely by the device owner, which is iPhone or Android?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of music, there's a big difference currently between Apple Music and Spotify, and that is that Apple Music hosts Dolby Atmos content as their spatial audio format, which is amazing. And we as a company, we've done a lot of work, both in terms of music mixing for Dolby Atmos, as well as audiobooks, like immersive audio stories that are audio only, and they sound super awesome on Apple Music. Spotify is stereo only, and so you'll only ever really get a 2-channel content. And I think this is partly to do with the fact that there is no open standard for the spatialization of music, right? Not everybody that has a Spotify account has Spotify headphones. There's no such thing as Spotify headphones, right? So if you're a company and you go like Spotify, okay, we're on every platform. We're on Android devices, we're on Linux devices, we're on iOS devices, Mac, Windows, we're on every single device, including Chrome OS, right? We're on everything. So if we're to build a if we're to adopt as a company, if I'm speaking on Spotify's behalf, if we are to adopt a spatialization format, it makes sense for that to be Dolby Atmos. Okay, cool. Great. However, currently there's only one platform where you can listen to that content, and it's Apple. And so you're directly competing with their own platform, with their own spatialization system, and their own headphone ecosystem. And so I don't think we're going to see we're not going to see Spotify be an immersive audio platform until there's a universal way for people to access that spatialized content. And so
who has to be
we
the
need to
one
get this open standard out there.
First of all, we're on Spotify. We need to make a switch quick.
But we need to get that open standard out there,
And look, and I mean, something like in Spotify's defense, the other thing is they have a huge music library, and to host Atmos content is data intensive. An album of music in stereo is around maybe like 350 megabytes or something, maybe 500 meg if it's a long record, at full audio bandwidth. So it's like 24, 48 or 44, 1, 16-bit, like CD and above kind of quality. Atmos, an Atmos stream for an album, you're probably looking at like 13 gig of content.
Wow.
I know people who have data just that exact amount for a month on their phones. So that's not going to be possible to listen to outside for a lot of people.
Yeah, so I think that's a big hurdle. Now, Apple, I think as a company, they're a very wealthy, well-run organization that produce a lot of products that people love. So they have a lot of money, and I think they can take the data hit as a loss leader to build out an immersive platform, which is the right move. And I'm really, really glad that somebody is doing it because it's amazing. But when you look at someone like Spotify, that their only product is the streaming of is music and podcasts and audio content. The hit to their bottom line to host for the data hosting of that work, and then the ingress and egress costs that they would have for their data centers to do that work is substantial. So there's a huge financial footprint for companies to do this work. And I think that's something else that we need to kind of, that needs to be taken into consideration. I think that's one is the data bandwidth and the hosting of that work. That's, very, comes at a very high cost that only a few companies can really afford right now. And then, there's obviously, the end user limitation of like how many people are actually going to adopt this format as a way to listen to music.
So one thing you mentioned is how companies like the company that you work in, you guys are always on the lookout to improve the technology, to go beyond. And at the same time, there's platforms now that are supporting that, like you mentioned, like Apple, who are caring enough about immersive audio. And of course, I think as consumers, if we have the option, we'd love to listen to immersive audio. Like there's no doubt about that. Yeah. But what about artists? And I'm talking not just about music artists. I'm talking about artists within the film realm, talking about producers, all these decision makers who are creating the art. How conservative have they been in using the latest technologies when it comes to immersive audio? I'm sure you guys have things that you experiment with and probably something that you talk to them about. Are they always willing to experiment and, have these newer technologies added into their workflow? Or sometimes you see them be like, no, I want to just stick to the old ways of doing things?
It normally, so yes, absolutely. So there's two answers to that question. One is yes, when we show people what is possible, the general response is a wow response, like, oh wow, like I never knew that you could do this thing. And it's particularly impressive when you come into like one of our studios and you're sitting in a beautiful environment that's sort of custom built to experience this work, right? So that's there's definitely it's the most idealistic place to do this, but that's where we do our work. So that's where we want people to experience this, the possibilities of this work. Now, the second part to this is like it generally comes down to budget, and different kinds of content or different work that we do will have different requirements in terms of budget. And we've noticed this a lot. Like we were one of the first studios in the UK to have like a full Dolby Atmos setup, many, many years ago. And initially when we started working with content companies like Netflix and Amazon, the initial spec was that everything needed to be in Atmos because it's one of the systems that allows you to kind of fold it down into everything, like right down to mono. So you can go all the way from super immersive 714 down to 5.1, down to stereo, down to mono. So it was a good format, actually. It is a good format for streaming platforms because no matter what you're listening to it on, you'll always get the version that kind of works, It folds down really well. It's like origami. You can kind of think of it as origami.
Oh, yeah. Takes any
shape. So the initial problem was like when Dolby Atmos first came out, it's very time consuming. It's a time consuming process because you're not just moving things left to right. You're moving things left, right, up, down, backwards and forwards. So you're finding these positions in the room where the world lives. And that just by nature is more design time and more implementation time because you have all these new places where sound can be. And where a lot of, especially in film and TV, where a lot of those discussions kind of, have a jumping off point for a lot of people is when they're like, it's like, oh, well, that's actually far more time than we had allocated for this work. Now, we don't have that experience in video games, because I think in video games and in the immersive VR world, the emphasis on what we're doing is different. And we talk like part of keeping people engaged in a gaming experience or in a VR experience is you need this sort of tactile environmental feeling to it, because it's the general experience is much longer than a TV show. It's much longer than a film. It's much longer than an animated series. It's not abnormal for someone to play a game for 2 or 3, 5, 6 hours. And over the course of many weeks and many months, and often you're revisiting these experiences year after year. It lives with you, and so I think game companies and game designers and audio directors at game companies have a very different task to filmmakers and storytellers, like in 2D worlds. And so we generally, when we talk about film TV, if there's a budget for it and it's important to the project, then it'll generally get green lit and it'll be part of the experience. And we've done some amazing work in that world, and even to sort of for documentaries where you wouldn't normally sort of take this more immersive approach, it has really enhanced and the storytelling aspect of these feature documentaries that we've worked on. But I think the conversation that we have with people in interactive storytelling in video games and obviously in VR and AR applications, it's different from the get-go, because the whole point of doing that work is to try and keep people engaged, and sound, and especially immersive sound, plays a huge part in engagement. And I think that's actually one of the areas, especially in VR, where I mean, this is just my personal belief, but I think it's one of the reasons why we haven't seen a huge adoption of VR as a platform, because people have approached sound largely like they have for a TV show or for film, and so like, oh yeah, like this work, this is.
I 100% agree with that. We played so many VR games. That's 100% true.
So I think that's part of the problem in it, and that's really like our job as a sound company is to push the envelope in that world, and to use sound as a thing that enables someone to feel more at home in the platform. Sound plays a different role in immersive environments as it does in 2D environments. So when we talk about Dolby Atmos, when we talk about ambisonics, or these technologies for sound reproduction and the engineering of sound, the conversation is different for us in film and TV as it is compared to VR and immersive display technologies, because the human relationship is different, and I think the financial emphasis of where someone is willing to invest in their world is also slightly different. Now, in saying that, there are a lot of projects that we do which have to be in Dolby Atmos, and we spend a lot of time and a lot of effort, and we put a lot of creativity into that world. So I definitely don't want to diminish the work that we do in linear content, because we do a lot of work in these formats. But when we're trying to convince somebody to work in it, it's easier to convince someone in 3D display technologies versus 2D. And I think that's also partly because filmmakers are still learning the power that these technologies have in terms of their own production value. And when you go to a cinema, you're looking at a specific place. And so 3D sound has a very different kind of a role in these, when you're just looking in one direction versus when you can look in all directions. So like if you're looking at a big cinema screen, it makes sense that some things, and they're all built to draw you into this main focal point that you have. So the approach to storytelling, and I think the emphasis that filmmakers have, it's a different kind of approach. And so I think filmmakers are still also very much learning the power of these tools, And I think, again, it kind of comes down to where people are consuming this work, right? So if the only platform that, like, if you're building a film, if you're making a film and it's going to go on a streaming platform like Amazon or Apple Plus or Disney or Netflix, you're like, where are people going to listen to this thing? And then you're like, okay, they might be watching it in bed on an iPad. Okay, how are they listening to it? Through the little speakers on the iPad. So automatically, from a filmmaker's perspective, like, well, if that's where it's like, we're going to build for where people are going to be watching this stuff. And I think, the only place currently where you can watch something on iPad and get a fully immersive experience is on an Apple iPad with Apple headphones. So until that changes, I think we're missing the education layer for young filmmakers to start to understand the importance of this kind of work.
Let's talk about that, because what you said is so important, and I think this is going to bring the most value for everybody watching. We have people who are watching who are, like, very recently we met with one of the audiences on YouTube. He's creating his own virtual music festival in Unreal Engine 5. So he's a DJ. He made his own sets and his own background, and there's like cameras moving around. Cool. That's one example. We have people who are creating cinematics with Blender and Unreal Engine 5. We have content creators who are creating for Instagram, and they're just doing quick little videos. Where can people go and how can they educate themselves on the power of sound? Everything that you just talked about today, where can they find all these informations to improve the quality of their sound and also be up to date with the technology?
I mean, selfishly, I would say you call a great sound designer to help you. I think that a good education start point, like, there's not a central place that I would say, like, go to this place and learn all about the things. I mean, I've talked to people that are building courses on educating people on different immersive audio technologies. Dolby has an amazing, knowledge base and an education system of how people can work with Dolby Atmos. I'm sure Apple have something for Logic, Nuendo, Cubase. Like, if you're working in audio platforms, all of the companies that make these systems have tutorials on how to use them, and a lot of these you can try out for free. Like, you don't have to spend any money on doing it. In terms of just watching a bunch of stuff or like immersing yourself. I mean, currently I would just say, like, go to Apple Store, buy some headphones, and plug it in and turn on spatialization and listen to it for yourself, and you'll start to hear how that works, and how that might apply to your work. I think one is, like, immerse yourself in some of this content so that you can hear what people are making and you can hear what you like and what you don't like. But I think ultimately, like, we need the sound. It's the sound community's job in every creative industry to show people how important this work is. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you both on this call, is to kind of it's part of this step of what we can do as a company to also engage with people, to talk to people about what we're doing, what we think is important, why we think it's important, to show people why it's important, to welcome people into our creative process and into our world, so that hopefully we can spark some imagination in people, like, oh, this is, I've always thought about it like this, but it makes a lot more sense to break it up into this sort of process. And then selfishly, I want to put more people to work in creating great content. And while we have a really great big team here in Vancouver that does this, and we have teams in Los Angeles, we've got studios over there, and in the UK, all of these studios that we have, they're all producing immersive audio work every single day for huge platform companies to, like, small content creators. So we as a company are, like, firmly focused in on this world. But I think until people sort of have their own personal experience a little bit more, they won't have formed an opinion of why they want something a certain way. And so I think there's still kind of an education process to start with. But I would say, borrow or buy a pair of headphones and try it out for yourself.
So for
I mean, the other thing is, if people are, like, high-end influencers on these platforms, and you're going to, the next, whatever Instagram developer conference or, these platforms, talk to the audio teams there and talk to them about the limitations of their platform. Instagram is mono, and it has the most AR filters and AR content out there. It's a phenomenal place to tell stories and to engage with the public, but it's mono. It's like, and I get it, bandwidth, data, data bandwidth requirements, yada yada yada. I get why it's mono, but maybe we should start thinking about this being, a more kind of immersive experience. Same thing with TikTok, an amazing storytelling platform for short stories and people to interact with each other. Like, it's a phenomenal media streaming platform. But again, it's really I think it's mono. It's either mono or, I'm pretty sure it's mono. It might
How
be
about YouTube.
Well, so YouTube is interesting because YouTube supports ambisonics in its format. So
ambisonics being all directions, right? In terms of
you can imagine it like a big glass bubble around your head, and so there's maybe we'll so I'll explain what YouTube is. So YouTube is actually doing a really good job, and I actually think Google might be one of those companies that might, that they have enough money. They don't build enough of their own hardware, that they're sort of married to it. The reason why they build hardware is to showcase how great Android is. So their hardware development is firmly in the proving ground for how amazing their software is. And their software is open, right? Anyone can make an Android phone and build Android apps. So, but essentially what YouTube has is first order ambisonic implementation. And what first order ambisonic is, you can imagine it like a big glass bubble around your head, and you can move your head inside of this glass bubble like this. So if there's a sound that's here, I'll just put it so my camera can see it, like here, and I move my head, that sound stays in place and the vision moves, right? So that's ambisonic. Then fixed ambisonic, or binaural, what we would call it, is where when you turn your head, the bubble moves with you like this, and so you still get the spatialization, the room, the 3D effect, but when you move your head inside of it, you don't hear anything. But YouTube supports 360 videos and supports first order ambisonic. So actually, in terms of it being an open platform for the use of spatialized content, whether it's both visual and audio content, there is a really robust interpretation layer there, and anyone can access it with any headphones. So that might actually, in terms of education, that might actually be a good place to start, is to look at, plug some headphones into your computer, go to YouTube, type in 360 audio experience or whatever, and you should be able to find a bunch of content that helps you understand how audio spatialization works. I think that's actually that might actually be the best education point, because it's free and it just works,
and it works with most headphones, right? It's not
any headphone.
You don't have to have an Apple.
Okay. That's great, actually.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be any pair of headphones. You can plug in, and as you move the 360 video around, you should hear the sound kind of shift and change. Now, it doesn't support head tracking currently. So again, everybody, open standard for interpretation. But you can imagine once you have that, and you can use a VR headset to watch a 360 YouTube video and get head tracking, because the VR headset is doing it, but you can't do that with just on your screen.
When you say head tracking, that would be as if you get closer to the sound. So does that mean like if you walk, you get closer to the sound, or if you just move your head, you get closer to the sound?
It's just that initially, I think we're just talking about head movement. Getting closer and further away from sound is sort of room scale spatial audio. Right. And we're currently developing a game that's really there to showcase room scale spatialized audio work. So it's a year away, but I'll come back and talk to you guys about that.
Come back. We got to talk about that. Yeah, 100%.
so that, yeah, initially I would say you're sitting in a chair and you want to experience the world around you. YouTube 360 is a great place to start. And a lot of our work as a company has been to build 360 content for YouTube creators. So we work with this company, Shutterstock, and we launched a huge ambisonic music library. So specifically for people working in 360. So first order ambisonic. So it's fairly low resolution spatial audio, but it's low bandwidth. It's only 4 channels and it works natively in YouTube. That's why we wanted to make it. So, currently there's a couple of thousand tracks on Shutterstock that we've mixed in 360 audio. And then we've built, the world's first 360 sound asset catalog. And again, it's built in ambisonics and 5.1. So it sort of applies to filmmakers as much as it does to 360 content creators or video creators. And I think right now there's probably, I don't know, I think it's somewhere around the 70 to 100,000 assets living on the Shutterstock library in terms of sound effect usage. So, and we talked to Shutterstock, and we wanted to build a tool set for creators. And I think that's the other thing. It's like, yeah, there's some good examples of this work, but people need tools. They need plugins. They need assets like you guys use, Artlist or Epidemic Sounds or, these kinds of places. Those places are the place where you go to find something to build with. And so there needs to be places like Shutterstock that have 360 content that content creators can buy for like $5 or something, plug it into their project, because not everyone has the budget to hire a big sound company to do that work for them. So so I think, like, I'm hopeful we'll start to see a lot more of that. But a big part of our job as a sound company is also to help create that work. And so we do a lot of partnerships with bigger brands and bigger companies to build these asset libraries and these asset catalogs for specific companies, for specific usages. And so that's, another big part of our job is the creative, bespoke work, and then building work for other people to use.
But for those that are interested in hiring a sound designer or getting a company to do their sound design, at what stage they need to consider sound designers to come in? Is it before I start shooting, or is it in my storyboard time? Like, where is the place that, okay, now it's time to consult someone, now it's time to start creating?
For film and TV, it's firmly a post-production process. So that is, you've finished your filming, you've finished, like, there's a fairly standardized process, unless it's a Christopher Nolan film and there's like some kind of specific aspect to the filmmaking process that requires somebody to work far in advance to create a palette of sound work to be put into the film. But for most standard films, you could say it's a post process. There's sound design, dialogue, editorial, sound mix, finish, and the project's done. For games and for VR games and VR experiences specifically, I would say the storyboarding part is when you need to start talking about sound. And we're talking about it in terms of these 4 layers again, because you need to build, like, what does this scene feel like? Where does that need to go? And then what are the static objects? What are the moving objects? What's the person feeling? What's the personal experience? The reason why we do that during the storyboarding process is because game and, like, interactive development is iterative. It's not a linear process. You might design the landscape for a specific level of your game, and then you need to test that landscape. You need to test on devices. You need to go, like, you need to look at optimization, and so you might build something, and then you get feedback, and you build optimization systems to make the grass better or different color, whatever it is. There might be some interactive work that needs to happen, so you need to make sure that things interact properly. And slowly, you're sort of building the world. You're building the story, you're building the games, and you're building this experience. And so sound often is part of that layering of stuff. It's integrated into the process. And especially when sound and vision affect each other, you need to plan that interaction. And so, that's all the way from sort of timing, like especially when you're doing like cinematic bits in games, you need to pre-plan the timing, and if it's an immersive asset, you need to be able to test how how someone might experience this thing. So I'd say for game and for VR development, it's an iterative process, so it really helps to be part of that initial storyboarding process.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of our linear work, we love being part of the initial production planning of the work, because it allows us to plan for to be able to do our job better. But to your question, there's probably these two very distinct processes. I think it's post for film and TV. It is very much from storyboard onwards, if possible, if not from sort of first build stages onwards. But I think it's more important for VR to be integrated into that production line, because it's half of what somebody's going to experience. It's half of it's half of the world.
No, I think that's very true, because we do experience the same thing when we talk about video games. I genuinely believe that is the way that things should be, because like we talked about, the level of engagement that you have in a video game is very different compared to anything else. Since we're almost out of time, I have one last question I wanted to ask you, which is, we talked a lot about immersive audio, about spatial audio, and all these cool technologies. What is out there on the horizon that is coming that people should be expecting in terms of audio technology, or maybe something that is missing that you think there should exist, that you would be excited to see in the world of audio?
So I'm excited for two things. One is I'm really excited to see what Google do around immersive audio, both in terms of the technology layer, and also in terms of the sort of openness of those standards. Secondly, I'm excited about trying to build an open standard for headphone tracking data, and I know I've mentioned this a bunch of times, but we can't have a great experience unless it's accessible to everyone, and that's why I'm excited about these two things. Is that when you look at how Google develop their tools and their APIs and their systems, it's very device agnostic, and I think that's what I would love to see sort of more of. And then I'm excited to see what people create with it. When these new things sort of come online and things become more accessible, that's when we start really seeing people really bringing new ideas into these worlds. And my hope is that will be the sort of the turbocharging of these immersive display systems and technologies, and the sort of the wider adoption for that as work. I think there's probably like a third thing that I'm sort of excited about too, and that is in terms of like creative approach to sound design for experiences. Like, as we see that adoption grow around VR and sort of more immersive display technologies, is how there will start to become more emphasis on the audio design of an experience. And not just in games, but just in terms of even like UI development and user experience development on these systems. Because, the way that our user experiences in real life is it's not always exciting, like picking up a pair of headphones and, moving a water bottle around or opening a flippy lid on a thing. Like these aren't like exciting sounds, but they give us a lot of comfort and security in terms of like understanding the world around us. And as we have more people using these 3D display systems, we have to, as all creators of all content, whether that's a warehouse management system all the way to a super immersive video game, sound will become a big part of the success or failure of these experiences. And so I'm excited for the sound community in general, because I think we're going to start seeing just necessary emphasis on sound more and more as we go into more and more immersive technologies. So, and I hope that more and more companies start coming to the table, like Google, building these systems, building stuff that's more open, more accessible, and more universally sort of applicable. In saying that, again, like there's lots of great stuff already out there, and we're definitely not short of like great tools to do great work. And we've mentioned a bunch of them on this call. So we definitely, as a company, don't play favorites with anything. We just use the best tools for the job, and the more tools that are out there and the more accessible they are, the more successful we will be in our work, and the more successful I think content and application creators will be in finding an audience and adoption for their work as well.
Mirko, what is the best way for people to reach out to you and your company if they want to start their sound designing for their content, VR games, films, documentaries?
So I mean, look on our website. There's all depending on where you are in the world, you can look on our website, and each of our cities sort of has a contact info. My email is mirko@vaudeville.tv. It's on our website as well. You can obviously find me on LinkedIn as well if you want to chat to me directly. And then, I mean, I'm open to talk to anyone and everyone about the work that we do, and I hope that we can help people, tell some great stories and expand on what they think might be possible in terms of sonic storytelling and hopefully, future-proof their content a little bit as well. If you build something that lasts for a long time, you want to make sure that no matter what the experience is right now, that experience is going to be expanded or extended in the future without having to rebuild everything from scratch.
Well, it's been honestly a pleasure speaking with you. We couldn't get more excited about audio after speaking with you for about an hour. And we're definitely going to be taking in everything you mentioned and thinking through the way we incorporate audio into our work. And I'm sure everybody watching will be doing that as well. And at the same time, hopefully, by the next time we have this conversation, we do see that, I guess, VR game that you guys were talking about, the spatial audio that you guys are working on, plus the open standard is something we're looking forward to see happen. One prediction before we go, do you think it's going to happen anytime soon, the open standard? Do you see that as well?
The more people I speak to about, the more I think it will happen. It'll take a while, honestly. Like it'll be like, the Matter standard for IoT devices that kind of came about. I think it'll be something like that, to be honest. It'll be like a bunch of companies getting together at a conference, and then someone like myself or like my peers in this world of immersive audio being like, hey guys, can we invite you out, like Sony, Apple, Bose, Koss, Skullcandy, yada, yada, yada. Bunch of headphone companies, and be like, listen, Microsoft, obviously. I'll buy you guys dinner, but let's talk about this in really in terms of like the mass adoption of this work, and that we can't silo ourselves, because all it's going to do is create an incredible amount of friction for the consumption of content. Whether I think it's going to happen sooner or not, I don't know. I mean, product cycles are generally pretty long, to build a new pair of headphones, to build new noise cancelling systems. That, Bose, these companies don't release new products all the time. Sennheiser is another big one that I'd invite in, but and AKG, obviously, Audio-Technica. But the product cycles are long, and so you have to come up with a standard, and then slowly over many years you're building the adoption of this work. I would like to see it in the next 5 years. I think that would be a great starting point. And it's something like, if the opportunity is presented to myself and the people at our company, and obviously the people that we work with, I think we can make a pretty compelling case as to why we need to do something like this. And it's not motivated by greed, right? Like, there's no money in it for me to build some open standard for this work. But I see it as a necessary way to push what we do creatively forward. And so the intent for me isn't to be the owner of some standard. It's open, anyone can use it. You don't have to pay us anything. It is to build a system for us to do more creative work. And so
it's to enhance people's experience in the world of audio.
Yeah, and you take the Matter example, like, all those companies benefit. They can sell more light bulbs, they can sell more switches, they can, whether you have an Apple HomePod that's going to talk to a Philips Hue light, that's going to turn on a Google thermostat, or, whatever it is. These systems and technology, they have to work together because people have to have choice in what they buy, and they have to have choice that fits their price point, where they are in life, and what they're doing. And that choice can't be, you have to buy a $5,000 computer and $800 headphones and a $1,500 phone. That is a great system, but it's not for everyone. It doesn't work it's too expensive, and especially if we look at like the developing world or countries where there's, huge economic disparity, like everyone should have access to this world. And until you can have the eyes of every single person that has a phone that can access these things, you're not really going to see a revolution in anything. The reason why Netflix is everywhere is because you can watch it on a phone, and you can watch it on a phone that's $60. And you can, so even if you have no running water, but you have internet access, you can watch a TV show. That's what that's the level of sort of adoptability and access that we need around the spatialization of sound as well. And so I think there's a good case. There's definitely a great dinner discussion to be had around that. And if anyone from these companies is listening, send me an email. I'd love to talk to you. And it's like, I'm happy to put on a huge dinner party for all of these companies to bring everyone to the table. And we can see how successful it is in terms of like what the Matter standard is doing, because you can buy an IKEA light switch that works with a Google whatever thing device, works with a Philips LED bulb. All of that stuff can work together, and that's the way we should look at immersive audio, both in terms of creation and consumption.
That's something that I think we need to push it as content creator also to happen by creating content around it and sharing awareness. I think that would be also playing a huge role.
That's something we were not aware of, and I'm sure a lot of people are not, the majority is not aware of this case that you just spoke of. And it's so important because, like you mentioned, it just causes mass adoption, and people can truly experience audio the way you guys are creating it and the capabilities that you guys have in a studio like Vaudeville. So we are definitely looking forward to this happening. Hopefully it won't take 5 years. I'm hoping for it to happen sooner. But yeah, like always, we're very excited to have spoken with you. There's literally the topic of AI that we wanted to cover that I think we have to leave for another discussion because of that coming into the world of audio. I think that is also a huge topic on its own. But we are very thankful for your time, and we would be looking forward to seeing you again. We'll leave all the links down in the description, so your email, your LinkedIn, and the company's website, so people can go and visit it. If they have any questions, they can reach out to you on LinkedIn. But just from me, a huge thank you for coming over today.
Yeah,
thank you so much, Mirko.
Yeah, absolutely, my pleasure, and thanks for opening this discussion here. I think it's an important discussion to have, and I'm glad that we had it today. Thank you.
No worries at all. Well, to everybody watching, thank you so much for staying up until now. We're going to be back again with another episode next week. We'll announce the guests on our Discord channel, so if you guys are not in there yet, go to the description. That's where you can find who the next speaker will be. But up until then, take care, and we'll see you guys.
See you guys next week.